thank you so much for being here and for the invitation. I actually really love talking about this topic here. And the only apprehension I have tonight is that I'm supposed to do this in 60 minutes. And this is one of those where I'm so passionate about the topic, I tend to tell stories and meander and go on and on. So I will have to discipline myself a little bit to stay on topic. I'm a civil engineer, I'm a land use planner. Back in 2008, I started to write a blog to describe what I saw that I didn't think was working in the communities that I had worked with. I was really trying to figure out why, despite all our growth, despite all our public investment, despite all the things we were doing to create jobs and economic development, our cities were struggling. Our cities were getting poorer. Our cities were going broke. Our cities had massive, massive backlog of things that they had to do and didn't have the money to do it. That blog started to grow. People started to read it, pass it around. Some friends of mine actually started a nonprofit. They said, this needs to be something bigger than what you're doing now. And they filled out the paperwork and submitted it. And a year later, we had a 501c3. A few months after that, a foundation approached me and said, we find your work very interesting. Would you come and tell us what you do? I said, well, I don't do anything. I just write in my spare time. And when I met with them, they wound up giving me 3 years of startup money to leave my planning practice and go share this message with as many people as I could. Tonight we're going to talk about a little bit, focus on my hometown, but hopefully in talking about my hometown, you'll see some things that look similar to you and that you can use here in your thought process. I live in a city called Brainerd, Minnesota. Brainerd is 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Last night when I drove down, it was actually almost 4 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul, because it was snowing. This is where I grew up. I actually grew up on the farm that was homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents. Way out here in Baxter, Minnesota, this is Baxter, and this is Brainerd. Baxter is the highway strip, and Brainerd is the old railroad town. Today I live just a little bit off of that park, right in that neighborhood up there. I'm very involved in the city. I'm actually on the Planning Commission now, but even before I was on the Planning Commission, back when they wouldn't let me on, that's another story. I was still very involved. I'm the kind of guy who would read the agendas and the minutes, online, watch the council meetings. We have them on like cable access TV. I would watch those. I have, read every plan, read every ordinance. I knew like what was going on in the community. I was very involved. One day on the front page of the paper, there was a story that our legislative team down at the state capitol in St. Paul had put in our bonding bill, which is the state borrowing money for capital projects, had put in a bonding bill a request for money to run sewer and water from the edge of town out to our airport, about 1.5 miles outside on the edge of town. I had never heard of this project. I had never seen this project. I had no clue what this was. And generally, when the legislative team asks for money, it's for something that is in the pipeline, right? Something that is in the works. I'd never heard about this. The request was for $7.1 million. So they said, we want the state to borrow this money, give it to the city so the city can invest this project. The reporter who reported on this was not a local reporter. They were like a stringer for a bunch of papers. So they just reported on this, but they didn't have the context. The local paper tried to get the context then the next day. They went to our legislators and asked them what was going on. We were at the time represented by John Ward in the House. He is a member of the Democrat Farm Labor Party in Minnesota. We do not have the Democratic Party. We have the Democratic Farm Labor Party. They went to John and they said, John, what's going on? And by the way, John's a really nice guy. He goes to my church. I like him. He's a nice man. He said, I always listen to my constituents. This is what I've told people wanted. If this isn't what people in Brainerd want, let me know and we'll get something else in the bill. But this is what I was told people wanted. They then went to Cary, rude. Carrie is in the Senate. She is a Republican. So we're represented by a DFL and a Republican in our district. Carrie is also a very nice person. I like her. I know her personally. She's a very good senator. They asked her, Carrie, what's going on? And she said, you know, we have to get this project started. This is the process we go through down here. If we don't get the money into the bill now, we can't come ask for it later. So we've got deadlines around here. Let's get this started, and then we'll have a conversation. If we decide in that conversation that we don't want to do this, we can always pull it out. The problem is we can't put it in later. So let's get this going. That was an unsatisfactory set of answers. And so people started to dig, and the city ultimately got some questions from the newspaper. Hey, no one around here has heard of this project. Like, where did this come from? And City Hall issued a press release and said, basically, the fire marshal is requiring us to do this. We made some improvements out at the airport. We added a conference room, a restaurant, and a jet bridge. And just so you realize how insane that is, we get 2 flights a day, one in the morning that leaves and one in the very late evening that comes in. I don't know who is using the restaurant at 7 in the morning or 11 at night. But we also used to have, you know how when you fly here out of Denver, you walk across the tarmac and get on the plane? We used to have that. Now we have the jet bridge that goes out. Both of those things, by the fire marshal, require more water protection. So more fire protection, more water capacity out at the airport for fighting fires. And the city said, you know, this is the reason we have to do this project. This is the reason why we submitted it to the state. Just as a little aside, just for some context, I'm an engineer. I understand, you know, what they're asking for here. They're basically asking for a bunch of water in case, you know, there's a fire out there. How could you provide this? An underground tank could do this, right? Like a holding tank. We could have solved this problem for literally like $250,000. This is not that big of a deal. Why are we doing it like this? Because it's an impetus to get something done that's on somebody's list, right? We've got a need, and so if we can get the state to fund it, we can get something done. In fact, that's kind of what started to transpire then. Because even though this seems like a ridiculous project to anybody who steps back and look at it, the conversation around the coffee shops in town started to shift, right? People started to say things like, you know, Chuck, how can you be against this? It's going to create jobs. We have one of the highest levels of unemployment in the state. We need the jobs. Are you saying you're against the jobs? Like, would you turn down this money? Chuck, it's not going to cost us anything. You know, this is money coming from the legislature. If we don't take it, someone else is going to take it. How could we not do this? Chuck, think about all the growth that this is going to create. It's going to open up this 1.5 miles now. It's going to have utilities in it. It can be developed. Think of all the great things that will come about that. And then, of course, you know, Chuck, do you ever think of the children, right? I mean, if the fire marshal is saying we got a safety problem here, are you going to stand up and say we don't? Come on, Chuck. You know, get with the program. Of course, what does the legislature do? They don't give you $7.1 million. What do? They give you something less than that, right? Just enough to where at the local level, you've got to make some hard decisions. Do we come up with our share or not? You know, which we ultimately figured out a way to do it, right? Why? Because as soon as that money started to go through the pipeline, who shows up? Well, all the engineering firms, the contractors, the related governmental organizations, all these people started a kind of a local campaign to talk up this project and say, we really need to do this. Don't get in the way of progress. We got to support our legislators. They're down there fighting for us. Let's do this. And at the end of the day, what do we have? We've got a funded project. We've got a project that's essentially funded and ready to go. I've labeled this the project development process because I've worked on many, many, many projects, and this is how they come together, right? You have a need, you go looking for a funding source, then you sell it to the community. what is missing from this process? What is the one like obvious thing missing from this process? People, right? Citizens, right? Like the people in the community. Don't worry though, we have a public engagement process, right, that we go through. We will go to the public now with our funded project and we will say, look, we've got this issue with the fire marshal. We've got 3 options for you to consider, right? Option number 1 would be a gold-plated pipe out to, the airport. Option number 2 would be to do nothing and get fined by the fire marshal. Or option number 3 is this nice kind of moderate option between those two, something that, by the way, the legislature's already funded, and we just have to come up with this little bit of money to do. What you, the public, would prefer? What would you prefer? So we're listening. We have had a public engagement process. And we wonder why people get angry, right? We wonder why people feel disconnected. We wonder why people don't feel represented. We wonder why people get frustrated with the system, right? This is how we have built cities really for the last 70 years. Post-World War II, we embarked on this new kind of experimental way to create prosperity across the entire continent. And the idea was that our cities were now going to undergo a series of what I would call like radical transformations. Large-scale projects that we were going to do that would be a catalyst for growth. And so we created systems to do these types of investments over and over and over. We reoriented our local governments. We reoriented our regional and state governments to be conduits for large volumes of money coming in to do transformative types of projects, both in the private sector and in the public sector. We have an urgent need today to not, change this, tweak this. We have an urgent need today to actually turn this on its head, to actually invert the project development process. Because the one thing that is very clear is that this process has not made our cities stronger. This process has actually made our cities weaker. It has created a lot of growth, a lot of transactions, a lot of new investment. But that investment has come with a ton of liabilities. We'll look at this a little bit in a map I'm going to show you in a minute. But let me give you a 30-second summary of kind of the key insight of strong towns, the one that kind of got us started back in the very early days. When we grow today, we go in and put in a mile of pipe or a block of street or what have you. When we grow, we at the local government level, we as cities, we as a community, get a lot of short-term cash advantage from that growth in the terms of permit fees, new tax revenue, new people in the community doing sales and buying things. We get a lot of short-term benefit from that from a cash standpoint. But what we take on is a long-term promise that we will provide service and then we will go out and maintain all this stuff. We will fix all the roads and the streets and the sidewalks and the curbs. We'll repair all the pipes and the pumps and the valves and the meters. Those promises don't come due for a generation. They're decades away. But the cash we get is very real right now. And what we see when we compare those two over time is that we get a nickel, a dime, a quarter of cash for every dollar of long-term promise that we take on. And when we look at this over time, what we see is that the more cities grow, the weaker they become. The more fragile they become, the poorer they actually become. And so we have this fundamental urgency right now because our cities are very spread out in an extremely expensive way with lots and lots of infrastructure and not nearly enough tax base to sustain it all. And so what our urgent need become is not how do we do some big, huge project to be a catalyst for more of this style of development, but a different approach. How do we go back to the things we've already built and get more out of them? How do we make better use of the stuff that we already have in the ground? How do we as we are going broke, as we're struggling financially at the local government level, how do we actually get more for our investment? How do we get more for that public liability? How do we squeeze more out of every block, out of every street, out of every section of pipe? And to do that, we have to twist this on its head. There's a saying out of Silicon Valley that I like to quote. It goes, innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. We all prefer smart to dumb, right? But as an affluent society, we have a very strong preference for order over chaos. We will tolerate a lot of dumb in order to have order. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning, right? You can see in every direction, why don't you go? Because that would be chaos, right? We can't have that. I want to show you what this looks like from a development standpoint. I've been fortunate enough to work with the city of Memphis on a number of things. City of Memphis is a great place, but is a very poor place, a place that struggles often to do basic things. Memphis did all the things that a city was supposed to do after World War II, right? They ran the highways through the middle of the city. They ripped out their streetcar lines. They put in commuter suburbs. They grew out and out and out. They built a beltway. They kept building out. They eventually put in a second beltway. The city of Memphis is a massive place area-wise. Oftentimes we talk about Detroit as being a math problem where there's too much stuff and not enough wealth. And so, the problem is they don't have enough people, don't have enough wealth, don't have enough investment to take care of everything they have. Memphis is 2/3 the population of Detroit and twice the land area. So the math problem there is even worse. At one point, the city of Memphis decided that what they needed to attract development, to attract people to move to their community, to attract investment and capital, what they really needed to be a world-class city was an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the Mississippi River. And so what they did is they got their community together, they approved the money, and they built a stadium, and they went looking for an NBA team. They ultimately got from Vancouver what team did they get? The Grizzlies, that's right. The problem is when the Grizzlies moved to town, they didn't like the stadium. So the city wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away from here. This one sat empty for 15 years. Orderly but dumb, right? Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue is one of those old streetcar stops that got torn out in the 1950s. They ran a highway through the middle of this neighborhood. Without the streetcar traffic, without the people walking back and forth, these blocks just died. Some residents, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters into their own hands. They went out. They worked with the landlords to get the buildings swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They put out benches and planters just on a temporary basis. They painted some bike lanes. They painted some crosswalks. They did little things to make this neighborhood a little bit better. For one weekend, they invited businesses from around the community to come in and open up and just show people in the neighborhood, this is what this could look like if it was occupied again. They didn't go ask for permission. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections, right? They figured that, by the time anybody gets mad and shows up and tries to shut us down, we're going to be gone anyway. They just went out and did it. Let me show you the difference between this chaotic and smart and that orderly but dumb. So that pyramid sat empty for a decade and a half. The city and the state did a joint project, get it converted into a Bass Pro Shop. It took an additional $204 million in subsidies to make this happen. And by the way, they're 2 years into this now. The projected revenues from it in this short period of time are at 50% of what was projected and are falling. Orderly but dumb. This chaotic but smart. Zero public dollars invested. 15 million in new property value appreciation, 50% increase in rents, 25 new businesses, 29 property build renovations, 17 properties taken off the blighted list. All from a total public investment of zero. This is chaotic but smart. This is the idea of going back and making better use of the things that we have. This is recapturing dead space. And once we grasp this, once we realize this, once we understand what's going on, what we see is that not only are these types of investments all around us, they're really the only types of investments that have ever made cities rich, that have ever brought cities true prosperity. When we look at the historic development pattern and understand, before the Great Depression, we can go back in human history for thousands and thousands of years. And what we see is that cities were built in a very similar way. Now, at the end of the day, the construction materials were different, the architecture sometimes was different, but the essential layout and design, the way they were assembled, was very, very similar. What we saw is that cities grew incrementally over time. After World War II, we began to build cities in a very different way. And oftentimes we associate that difference with the automobile, yet the difference is actually more subtle than that. Because other cultures around the world have the automobile and they don't build the way we do. The way we built changed. It changed from being incremental on a continuum of improvement to things being built all at once to a finished state. When we build today, we build in large blocks, and when we build, we consider the building to be done. It's complete. We don't have any anticipation that a development of single-family homes will someday become a development of duplexes or triplexes, that a development of duplexes will someday become a development of quad units, that a bunch of quad units will become row houses. That concept is foreign to us. We actually repel against it, right? We put our codes in place so that will never happen. When we build all at once, and we consider it done, finished. This is not the way cities were ever built before this modern experiment, for this new way of building. The way they were built is very simple. They were built slowly and incrementally. This is my hometown in 1870. This is the very first iteration. I can guarantee you that in 1871, was that when this city was founded? I think I was told that today. 1 year after mine got started, your city looked just like this, right? This is kind of the Midwest Great Plains version of the pop-up city. But we could go to the early St. Louis, early Chicago, early Manhattan, and they all started just like this, little pop-up shacks. We could go back to the first days of London or Paris or Rome or Cairo or Shanghai. What would you have seen? Little pop-up buildings, right? A hope and a dream. We built thousands of these across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact. A lot of these places would fail. What happens when a city like this fails? Does unemployment skyrocket? Does Wall Street start to crash? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out banks? No. These are like small little investments. People salvage what they can, they move on to the next successful place. We built thousands of these across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a way that we saw cities grow for thousands of years. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. So after 30 years of incremental development, these little pop-up shacks would turn into this more substantive street, wood structures, 2 and 3 stories. And after another 40 years, these 2 and 3 story wood buildings would become buildings of brick and granite. The way we build wealth, the way we become rich as a community, the way we prosper, is by making modest investments over a broad area, over a long period of time. We have, in our post-war development pattern, tried to manufacture prosperity very quickly, all at once. And what we see, and we can see this in your community as well as in almost every other city across this continent, is that our development now enjoys a generation of prosperity, followed by a generation of hanging on, and then a rapid decline. And think about this for a second. When you are transforming from little pop-up shacks to more intensive wood structures to more intensive brick and marble, what is going on with the underlying land value here? What's happening to the land during each of these progressions? It's becoming more valuable, right? This is the center of town. This is the center of everything. People would walk to this. Your proximity to it, the more people that lived in proximity to this, the more valuable it would become. And what you see is a natural system where as the land becomes more valuable, greater intensity of building is justified. It attracts more investment. It fixes itself. When we go out and we build a brand new subdivision today, and it is like the nice neighborhood, right? This is where all the wealthy people move. It's got the nice cul-de-sac. It's got the nice lawns, the latest style of home. It looks great. And the realtors say, this is the successful neighborhood. This is the place you want to be. You don't want to be in that neighborhood that was built 30 years ago. No, this is the new neighborhood. This is the best place to be. And we think that somehow we figured something magical out now, right? Like, oh, this style of home is the style of home that will hold its value. What happens 25 years later in that subdivision? Everybody's siding needs to be painted at the same time. Everybody's roof fails at the same. These homes were all built within 3 or 5 years of each other. Everybody's roof fails at the same time. Everybody's sidewalk and driveway goes bad at the same time. All of your appliances fail at the same time. Everything fails at the same time. What's happening to your land value when this failure happens? Nothing. It's just stagnant. There's nothing bringing it up. There's nothing driving it up. You would have no proximity to anything that's, growing and becoming more attractive. That's not, you're not separating this neighborhood from anything else. And so what happens? Some neighborhoods are able to overcome that broad failure. Some neighborhoods are, for a short period of time, able to get everybody to fix their roof and able to get everybody to repaint their houses and still have money left over to maintain your yard and fix your sidewalk and fix your driveway. Most places don't. What do the affluent people in those neighborhoods do? They move to the next successful place, right? They see the signals, they see the signs. They pick up and move to a place that's a better investment. So who gets stuck in the declining neighborhoods? The people who don't have the money to fix them. This is a pattern we see over and over and over. It's very different than the way we used to build cities. This was a way that poor people used to build. Why? Because it was a series of small bets. Small bets that had limited downside. If you screwed up, you weren't going to lose all that much. If there was a wrong place for the pop-up shacks, you just had a little pop-up shack. You salvaged what you could and you moved on. If it didn't really justify the big 2-3-story wood building, it was a wood building, not like a 12-story, marble tower. You learned what you could and you moved on. It's a series of successive little bets. This is the way poor people build. Because poor people they're forced to be prudent. When we built our strongest towns, when we built our financially most successful communities, we were dirt poor. And we did it this way because we had to. I want to show you how powerful this approach is. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the same size, the same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure. They're in the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. That old and blighted block looks like this. Oop, sorry. That's actually kind of what it looks like right now too, because we just got Got a foot of snow this weekend. How many of you would love to have this block in your town? I tell you what, my town does not like it. You've got your, bankruptcy attorney, your pawn shop, your, wino stop. You've got it's one of those, where they sell the booze in the paper bag. You know what I'm talking about. You've got the barber shop where you can still get the flat top, right? The city has labeled this blight. And when people come to visit my community, nobody goes to this block, right? Like nobody is drawn or attracted to this. And understand what you're looking at here. You're looking at the 1920s version of the pop-up shack. When my city was growing incrementally, the next increment of out in the 1920s would have been these 3 blocks. And so what you're looking at is the cheapest building someone would have built back in that period of time. And they would have done it with the hope that if the community continued to grow and prosper, someday the land value would go up and you would get a second and third story. They could maybe sell and make some money, or they themselves could invest. That's not what happened, though, right? This block was built. 2 blocks over was built. And then we had the Depression, and we had World War II, and then we had a completely different pattern of development that skipped right over these places and started building out on the edge. These blocks have stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. Now we have the new Taco John's drive-through. Do you have Taco John's here? No? Used to. So you know the glory of the potato ole. Half a hash brown, or half a tater tot with seasoning dipped in cheddar cheese, exactly like they do in Mexico. We love Taco John's. So we got a brand new Taco John's. We got rid of an old and blighted block. We've got this. It meets all the codes, all the ordinances. It's got a double drive-through lane. We got rid of blight. We got something shiny and new. Isn't this fantastic? Let me show you something about these 2 blocks. That old and blighted rundown junkie block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new taco place, the one that we really wanted because we got rid of all this blight, we transformed our city, we're making good positive investments, we're a shiny, new, successful place. Same size area, same amount of public infrastructure, total value, a little over $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional development pattern, the way we incrementally built cities around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that in its infant phase, after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a ridiculously wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And we all know what's going to happen to that taco place, right? 20 years from now, it'll be a used car lot. There'll be a new taco place up the road. 10 years later, we'll be boarded up. We'll be trying to get some kind of tax subsidy to get it torn down so we can get something new built there, right? We've all been around long enough to see this happen. This is the style of development that we do now. The city collects 78% more taxes from that old blighted block than that shiny and new. There's more jobs. There's more sales tax. It outperforms in every single metric except the eye test. We're in a big enough room now where I'm just going to assume that someone is red-green colorblind. And so I'm going to apologize to you off the bat for this. We did a study in the city of Lafayette, and a good friend of mine named Joe Minicosi, his team at Urban 3 does the mapping. And as a group, we talk in accounting terms. So when you're in the red, you're losing money. When you're in the green, you're making money. So we put this map together, and it shows red and green. I did not realize that there are people in society who are red-green colorblind, and that's my fault. But I don't have the capacity to change this map. I asked Joe for an updated one, and I think they'll get us one. But right now, I will try to walk you through it so that everybody can understand what's going on, even if you don't see the color disparity here. What we did in the city of Lafayette, they asked us a question, why are we going broke? And we went and we figured it out, and we showed them. We went and analyzed every source of revenue that the city had. We looked at every expense that the city had, and we mapped them all out. We had a series of like 4 dozen different maps. And at the end of it all, we mashed them all together and came up with one, basically like profit and loss map. Here are the properties that pay more taxes than they cost you to provide service to, and here are the properties that cost you more in service and maintenance than they're paying in taxes. So, what do we got here? There's a green spike right in the middle. This area, I'm going on both sides of it here. This spike right here is a green spike. That is a new urbanist neighborhood on the edge of the downtown. By new urbanist, I mean traditional building style. So, you know, narrow streets, tight lots, with modern finance. So everything built all at once to a finished state. From a cash standpoint, it's doing fantastic today. It's our most successful development. There's an open question, though, what will happen 25 years from now when everything fails at the same time? This development was built out within like 5-6 years. 25, 30 years from now, everything in that development is going to fail within 5-6 years. Will there be enough energy? Will there be enough capital? Will there be enough love and desire for these places to actually reinvest in them and maintain them as they are? It's an open question. History says no. Maybe this place will be different. To the right of that, to the east of that, is an area here in the middle, and I'm circling outside of it, but basically we're talking about a space right here kind of in the middle. That is Lafayette's core downtown. Lafayette, Louisiana would kill to have your downtown. Your downtown is a gem. Theirs really struggles, really struggles. Yet financially, it's doing fantastic, doing really well. To the east of that, there's a crescent of green that runs kind of from right down here, up around the swamp, up over in from here. So there's a crescent of green that runs through here. Those are the poor neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods where all the poor people live. Those are the neighborhoods where when we went there to do our work and we're going to get an Airbnb, they told us, don't go to those neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods where the homicides happen, the burglaries happen, like stay out of there. Financially, you're doing fantastic. Everything else on this map is red. Everything else. What is that red? Well, you've got the mall, the strip malls, the big box stores, the residential subdivisions on the windy cul-de-sacs with the dead ends, the houses with the 3-car garages. All that stuff is out here. All red. This map shows 2 subsidies, and they're the subsidies we see in every city across America. Subsidy number 1, the poor neighborhoods subsidize the affluent neighborhoods. That is a universal condition of the American development pattern that we have seen everywhere we've looked. Subsidy number 2, future neighborhoods, future residents are subsidizing today's residents. The future people are going to have to decide what we take care of, what we maintain, and what we don't. Today, the median family in Lafayette, Louisiana pays $1,500 in taxes to the city. In order for the city to make good on every promise that they have made, to maintain every street, every pipe, every water tower, every pump, to take care of all of it, taxes for the median family would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes would need to get sent back to the city just to maintain what they've already built. That will not happen. There's no way that will happen. And so at some point, the future generations, and they're already having to deal with this in a little way, but it will get steadily worse, is going to have to decide what neighborhoods they take care of, what neighborhoods they let go. What pipe they repair, what pipe they let fail. What pump they replace, what pump they walk away from. Because they're not going to have the money to do it all. This is the pattern we see repeated over and over and over again across North America. how do you make investments in this kind of a community? Well, think of it this way. If you are a city, let's think of it this way. If you are a business, and you're a business with 5 different divisions, and one of your divisions is profitable, and the other 4 divisions are losing you money, you only have money to fund 1.5 division. Which one do you fund? You fund the profitable one, right? And you hope you can increase the profits there and use that to maybe bring another one into profitability, right? You're strategically trying to make this work. What do you do if you're a city? Well, you've got 5 divisions, 4 that are losing money, 1 that is making money. What you do if you're a city is you go out and you build a 6th and a 7th that look just like the 4 that are failing. Right? We have to start talking differently about this. So I want you to embed this map in your mind here, in this basic pattern, because I want to walk you through a mental exercise about how we make public investments. We have a need to shift our conversation about public investments to embody 2 different mindsets simultaneously. One mindset is the mindset of the banker. The other is the mindset of the venture capitalist. What is the mindset of a banker? Bankers are, at their core, extremely conservative. They do not loan money unless they are almost 100% confident that they're going to get that money back. There's a saying that bankers work with the 3-6-3 principle. So you borrow money at 3%, you loan it out at 6%, and you get on the golf course by 3 p.m. It's a very simple business model. You cannot lose money that way, right? As long as you make good loans. What does a bank require if you go to get a loan? What do they require? Collateral? Why do they want collateral? Because if you don't pay, they want it to hurt for you. They've got to be able to get something, right? Banking is extremely conservative. Bankers like low risk and steady returns. How is this different from a venture capitalist? Right? Is a venture capitalist worried about getting their money back on each individual investment? Are they worried about, what's the level? No. A venture capitalist, and this is a really important part of this, is taking money they can afford to lose. So they're not taking all they're taking money they can afford to lose, and they're spreading it out amongst a bunch of different gambles, each of which they think has some likelihood of being really successful. And let's say they make 10 venture capital investments. They may know and understand that statistically, they're probably going to lose everything on 5 or 6 of them. On maybe 2 or 3 of them, they'll break even. But there'll be a couple that will be so fantastic and do so much better than anyone ever imagined that it will pay for all the losses and then some. Here's the problem. They don't know which one is going to be the successful one. They don't know. So they try them all a little bit. Venture capitalism is about high risk, high return. On Wall Street, there's an investment strategy called the Barbell Strategy. And this actually kind of embodies the way Wall Street looks at investment. If you go to like a broker and you want to put your savings into investment, SEC rules require them to go through and ask you all these just really asinine, ridiculous questions. Do you like a lot of risk or no risk? Would you bury your money in the backyard or go, give it to the next guy on the street who says he's got a good idea? And they go through like this whole series of things to try to gauge your level of risk. And it's all designed to do what? To have the outcome be, I like a medium amount of risk, right? We're all medium. Like, I don't want a ton of risk, but I'm not going to bury my money in the backyard. Just give me something that I can sleep well at night with. I want to make some money, but I don't want to go to the casino and put it all on red. In Wall Street parlance, you're called the sucker at the card table. People don't invest this way. What they do is they invest in a barbell strategy. They will take a big bulk of what they have, and they will put it in a banker mentality. I don't want to lose this. And they will take a little bit of what they have, and they will say, I'm going to put it over here and have some potential upside. They don't sit in the middle. That's the sucker at the card table. What they do is they put their investments on each side. Because what happens then is you limit how much you can lose. So you're never going to get wiped out. You're never going to lose a ton. You're never going to get hammered, right? There's a limit to what you can lose. But if you potentially do the right bets over here, you can do incredibly well. How do we take this mindset and put it to work in a city? How do we take this mindset and put it to work in a city? Because really, what we do today in cities, the investments we make, we do the next subdivision, we take over all that sewer and water and road and street. We get a little bit of cash today, but we can look in math and say, this is making us poorer. We do a big project to try to be a catalyst for growth, but it's not a tactical project. It's like a big... If we were going to be cities, what would we do? What would we do that would be a low-risk, steady return investment? I'm going to back up for a second, and I'm going to ask that question again. What investment in a city is a low-risk, steady return investment? It's maintaining the neighborhoods that are already successful. If you are in the city of Lafayette, your downtown should never lack maintenance. If you're in the city of Lafayette, your poor neighborhood should never have a cracked sidewalk or a street light that is out. It should never have streets with potholes or bad drainage problems. Why? Because these places are already making you money. Just go take care of them. That's a no-brainer investment, right? It's a no-brainer investment. You're already making money there. That's your banker investment. What does this other side of the barbell look like in a city? What does this small venture capital investment look like? This is what I want to show you. So when I published that stuff about the Taco Johns, my community got really mad at me. Yeah. I have a cousin who is the head of the Economic Development Authority that worked on that project. I have another cousin who is one of the managers at Taco John's. Yeah. Family reunions are awkward occasions. So they were really angry with me. And the feedback that I got from them was, okay, Chuck, you're so smart. What would you have done differently? We've got a block that is in decline. Taco John's comes and wants that block. What would you have done differently? Would you have said no? What would you have done? And I struggled with that for a long time. I struggled with it because I didn't know what to do differently. And what I ultimately wound up getting to is I had to reject the premise. You see, the premise of that conversation was that decline is normal. That we should expect and anticipate decline. That decline is just going to, all our neighborhoods are eventually going to go into decline, and they're going to need some type of rescue remedy. A tax subsidy, a bailout, a variance from the rules, a decline in the tax base, something. They're going to need something. I reject the notion that decline is inevitable, or that decline is acceptable, or that we should accept decline. And so what we did, a group of people in town, we went out into this neighborhood and said, all right, we don't have any money. Our city is broke. We can't spend a ton of money. If we were going to approach this as venture capitalists and try to find things that would be catalysts, kind of inspired by this Memphis block, what kind of things would we do? And we spent a year out in this neighborhood, just testing out things, looking at things, trying out things, observing where people struggled. And I think that's the key insight here is we went out and we observed how people were using the neighborhood and where they were struggling. And then we asked the question, what's the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? And at the end of a year of trying out things, using chalk and paint and testing things out and seeing how people reacted, we came up with a list of 8 projects that the city could do. 8 investments the city can make in this neighborhood to reverse the decline or stop the decline and signal to people that someone cared, that this was a neighborhood worth being in, that they could invest their capital in improving this neighborhood, and it wouldn't be a wasted investment. So here's our 8 projects. And let me just get you a little oriented before we start. The taco place is right down here. The old and blighted block is right here. My office, by the way, is right here looking out at this. My house is right over in this neighborhood here. This is a school right here where my grandmother went, my mother went, I went, and my kids went. The neighborhood school right here. There's an east-west and a north-south kind of backbone roads in this neighborhood. And then the park is right up here. This is the mall. And in local parlance, we call this the Old Mall. It was built in the early 70s. There's a new mall that was built in the 80s. And then the big box stuff was all built in the 90s and early 2000s. So this is the Old Mall. And it's been rehabbed. There's now a grocery store on this end. So let me show you what these projects look like. Project number 1, this is what the street looks like today. And what we noticed when we were out working in the neighborhood, we observed that the kids would struggle with this street. They'd often walk through the alleys behind it. They stayed away from this street. And we talked to some of them, and they said, well, our mom told us not to go here. The cars drive way too fast. And we went out and did a speed study. We just took a radar gun, the kind you'd use to, radar a baseball throw or whatever. And we did a little speed study, and we found that, yes, 2 out of 3 cars drove faster than 30 miles an hour. So we went out in the middle of the night, and we took chalk, the kind of chalk that you would chalk a baseball path with, baseball line on a diamond, and we chalked in narrower lanes. We said, what would happen if we just put a little edge friction in here and narrowed up these lanes a little bit? There's no markings out there now. And what we found is that we did a speed study again, and we found that only 1 car in a 2-hour period of time went over 30 miles an hour. So we said, let's go out and do that permanently. So right now, you have theoretically 2 parking lanes and then a 14-foot driving lane. We said, let's shrink that driving lane down to 9 feet. You could use the extra space for bikes. You could just crosshatch it and put a buffer in there, whatever you want to do. But let's just narrow up that lane because we want to slow the cars down so that it's a little bit safer to be on the street. Perpendicular to that street is this one. I'm going to show you the graphic, and it makes it look like, people say, oh, Chuck, you have light rail? No. We have an old lumber mill that used to get, the rickety old car run out there. It's now abandoned. They haven't ripped out the line yet. So this is an obscenely wide roadway. You'll notice there's no sidewalks. There's nothing here. At the very end of this is that old and blighted block. One of the things that block struggles with is that people don't walk in this neighborhood, or at least they don't walk a lot, because it's really dangerous and nasty to walk, especially around that old and blighted place. And so people, if they're going to go there, have to arrive by car. When you go by car, you park on the street. The traffic going by is going like 45 miles an hour, and you got to step out into it. So it really represses sales. What we realized is we can just make it a little bit safer for people to bike and walk. We can start to give those old and blighted blocks a chance and start to make the neighborhood a little bit more functional for people. So what we said is, let's take and stripe in a parking lane that would be out a little further, and then make that edge, basically 6 feet on both sides, into a biking, walking area that would, in theory, be protected by a row of cars. So we can't go in. We don't have the money to put in sidewalks. We don't have the money to redo the street. Let's just use some paint in the short term to create a little safety area for people to walk so people feel more comfortable out there walking. Over by our grocery store, what we noticed is that there is an area in the neighborhood where a lot of people walk, where they end up walking through to get to the grocery store. There's kind of like 2 funnels that funnel people to that spot. This is one of them. What we saw were the cars that would come through here would come through very, very fast. It's kind of a dangerous intersection. What we noticed is that a block away, when we got to the grocery store had this cross-hatching stuff in front of it. And what we saw was that the cars would slow down when they got to that cross-hatching. The cross-hatching indicated to them that you need to be aware that people are crossing here. Well, people were crossing a block over too, no cross-hatching. We said, let's just put that in. A block south of there was another one of these choke points, these funnel points where people would come through. The cars were going even faster across here. This is an extremely wide area. The cars going what would be right to left on your screen here. We're going very fast. We did recommended two improvements here. The first one was to just put in a crosswalk. We did this temporarily using white tape at night, along with some flags. We went and documented what people did. We interviewed people. There was people did say that they felt safer. They felt more confident crossing. We did notice that the drivers reacted to it too, in a way. We also, along the same stretch, once people would get across, they've got this really wide open area here. It's extra wide because that's what the city's commercial street standards are. The commercial street standards are that wide because theoretically you have parking on both sides, but there's parking lots all around here, so nobody parks on this. So what you have is just a really fast drag strip. The curb radius here is huge, so the cars just fly around this corner. We would see people walking here, and a car would come flying around the corner, and they would dive into the snowbank to get out of the way. So what we said is there's tons of room out here. Let's just put in a double stripe 10 feet in along the north side here and just give people like a safety area. The lanes are still going to be two 12-foot lanes, so still two obnoxiously wide, fast lanes. But let's take 10 feet on the one side and just, mark it off so that people can have a little bit of safety and feel like they can claim a little bit of space. This is the view on the north side of the neighborhood into the city park. The city was having all kinds of problems here, people selling drugs and doing other nefarious things. The police wanted to put in cameras out there. Our recommendation was, let's just trim the trees up. Part of the benefits of living next to the park is being able to see the park. These trees don't get any maintenance, and so basically they just block the view of the park. When you block the view of the park, nefarious things happen. Let's open it up so that we can have some natural policing of the neighborhood by people being able to see in. Once you get to the other side of the trees, here's what the park looks like. It's very neglected. In the time we were in this neighborhood, except for organized activities, so a scheduled softball game, we never saw anyone just out playing in this park. They just didn't do it. This is not a real great place. We said, all right, let's go out and just plant some trees. Let's plant some trees out here in the outfield, just some seedlings, create a little, it's going to take a decade or more, but let's start creating a forest out here to kind of block this old abandoned industrial site. And let's get some trees along here so that someday someone can sit in the shade and watch a ball game. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's just go do that. Let's get it started today. Our last project then was this street here. We identified this street as being kind of the best street in this neighborhood, the street that had the most potential for private investment. This was a really nice street. And by nice, my planner is talking here. Where is it? The buildings themselves line up very nicely. They face the street, so you get that natural kind of policing where the buildings open up in the front of the street, the windows face the street. It's got a neighborhood feel. They got really nice spacing. The street is not too wide, it's kind of narrow. You've got good sidewalks on both sides, nice boulevard. The only thing really wrong with this street is the street trees. Back in the 1980s, we had Dutch elm disease come through, wipe out a huge percentage of the trees. The city maintenance department hates trees, so they said, don't put them back, we don't want them. In fact, if they all die, that would be good. We found a number of studies. We actually found, I'll quote one study here. I can't quote this one at home because it will discredit me. In Portland, Oregon, they found that for every street tree on a street, the property values were $9,000 higher. Now, let's say that Portland is like crazy land, right? Like my city's not Portland, Let's say that they're off by let's say that it's $900, not $9,000, okay? The tree costs $50. Like, go out and plant it, right? Like, we will get that money back. So the idea was we needed 75 trees to kind of fill in the gaps here that we saw on the street and get that going so that someday we would have the really nice tree canopy back. This is our 8 projects. Now, the city did go forward with that project out at the airport. It was originally estimated to be $7.1 million. The city agreed to take the money from the legislature. Because it was an airport project, they actually wound up, as part of the agreement, entering into an agreement with the neighboring city and the county. So the city essentially bound themselves to doing this project. When the bids came in and the change orders were all done and everything was built, it wound up to be a $14 million project. The entire difference in the gap is made up by Brainerd taxpayers paying extra fees on their utility bills. It also robs us of the potential to use that debt capacity to do other critical things that are needed in the community. In contrast, here's what the 8 projects that we proposed would cost. $16,700. What happens if we go out to this neighborhood that is struggling with decline, struggling to attract investment, struggling with people who rightly look around and say, you know what, if I go out and paint my house and spend $2,000 doing that, or I go out and add a porch on and it costs me $5 or $6 or $8 or $10,000, you know what, I'm not going to get that investment back. That's a bad investment for me because this neighborhood is in decline. What if we can reverse that? What if we can signal to people that someone cares? That this neighborhood is not destined to just go bad? What if we can make small little investments in this neighborhood to signal to people that it's okay to get your private capital off the sidelines and start investing here? We're investing too. We're not going in and trying to transform everything overnight. We're not going in with some silver bullet rescue remedy. We're not going in with millions of dollars to transform everything and then assess it back to you, right? We're going to take care of things. We're going to maintain stuff. And we're going to make small little incremental improvements to improve the quality of life in this neighborhood. What if we go out and we make these 8 investments and then nothing good happens? Nobody says, wow, this is really becoming a nice place. Wow, I want to move here. I want to invest here. I want to make some improvement. What if none of that happens? Well, we're venture capitalists here, right? We're out $16,700. We can afford that. We learned 8 things that don't work. Next year we go try 8 more things, right? But I think these will work. And if we do this year after year after year, investments of this scale, by going out and looking at where people are struggling and making our best guess at what's the next smallest thing we can do to address that struggle. If we do that year after year, in neighborhood after neighborhood, we can actually make the lowest risk, highest returning investments we can possibly make. We can actually start to build wealth organically again in our neighborhoods. And we cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. That is a powerful combination. Jane Jacobs, a very revered writer in the planning profession, said famously, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. We have, in many ways, outsourced the future prosperity of our cities to systems and to people and to big ideas, when really what our communities need now, so desperately, is 1,000 small ideas. We need to go back in and make use of that stuff we've already built. Our cities are broke, they're insolvent, they're bankrupt. This is only going to get worse. And unless we dedicate ourselves to going back in and making better use of the stuff we built, making better use of it, getting more out of that maintenance project, getting more out of that little street rehab, getting more out of that block. I'm not talking about infill. Infill is the planner's term for something that we can do that won't offend you. What I'm talking about is actually going into our neighborhoods and saying, how do we get this neighborhood to move naturally to the next level of intensity? This is what we have to do if we want our cities to be solvent. And doing so does not require huge transformative investments. It doesn't require us to go to the state capitol or to Washington, D.C. to beg for money. It just requires us to take a little bit of our capacity and put it towards these venture capital kind of projects. If we unleash the power in this community, we can do great things. We can make low-risk, high-returning kinds of investments. And we can do it while improving people's lives. That's what a Strong Towns approach is all about. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, we have just a little bit of time for questions, and I will point out that if you were inspired and have a million ideas to share, now is not the time. We're going to do that at the Wild Goose in like half an hour. So let's just, if you would, we'll have some brief questions from the audience. Jeff is coming around with the mic, or Anna has the mic as well. So please wave at Anna if you would like to ask a question.
Someone's got to start, please.
Did any of the projects you suggested get done?
I should have just asked that, because everybody, that's always what I get asked. No. And in fact, I presented this, and I was lambasted, A, for not involving the city more deeply in the process. B, subjected to like a follow-up report by the city engineer and the city planner on why none of these projects were feasible, why none of them could be done. And I had 2 council members who thought this was horrible, that I was insulting the city of Brainerd and their approach. Those 2 council members are no longer on the council. This is part of like building a community, right? I worked to get them voted out. We now have 2 other people. Yeah, that's the great thing about elections, right? You come up with ideas, and then when they don't go anywhere, so we have 2 new council members are very supportive of this concept. We are 1 council member away from tipping this whole thing in a different direction. After years of applying for vacancies on the Planning Commission. So it's funny, you mentioned at the beginning that like Planet Edison named me one of the top urban thinkers in the country. I could not get on my own Planning Commission. They would not let me on. Last year, they had 3 vacancies and 3 applicants, and I was one of them. And the math finally went in my favor. So I'm on the Planning Commission now. So we're inching our way there. We're inching our way there. But not yet. Not yet.
All right, let's take another question.
Sorry, can I have a follow-up question? I love that you have Jane Jacobs at the end, because I feel like she embodies the whole idea of community making change. How do you suggest we engage community members and residents in different neighborhoods to make these things happen? Because the cost of having planners and planning studies in all of these different regions is cost prohibitive. And so I feel like that's the limitation.
So here's a really important takeaway. Jane Jacobs is revered by planners. And she's revered by planners, I feel like, for all the wrong reasons. If you actually read Jane Jacobs, she is a massive subversive of the system. There's this term that comes out of her writings called the sidewalk ballet. And I like to joke that when planners hear that term, they key in on sidewalk. And the actual operative term is ballet. Ballet being like a chaotic dance where people are working together and, I think we have to get rid of, and we have to stop talking about public engagement. How do we engage the public? Because what that means is that how do we go out and on our terms that are comfortable for us, get feedback from people who our decisions are impacting? And instead, I think that all of our public engagement needs to invert itself so that we are going out and observing people in their habitat, seeing where they are struggling, observing in a humble way, and then we are trying small little things to see if it improves the struggles, and then actually like looking and watching, does this actually make things better? And you can ask people like, we just fixed this little thing, did that help you in any way? Did that make you things better? I think our public engagement process today is not only broken, I think it gives us the wrong decisions almost every time. And if you think about it, imagine a room where everybody comes in and they have their own little small neighborhood concern. Then the city also wants to attract an NBA team in a pyramid-shaped stadium, right? And so you get, at the end of your public engagement, you get to vote for the things you think are most important in this huge list. You go up and you vote for your 2 neighborhood concerns, and then you say, you know what, it would be awesome to have an NBA team. Bam, that gets a vote too. And so what happens at the end of the day is instead of looking and seeing, we have 500 little neighborhood concerns that we should be out taking care of, what you see is a mandate for a stadium. That's what our process does now. And it's backward.
Next question.
I heard you describe a Ponzi scheme, but you didn't actually label that behavior as a Ponzi scheme, and I wonder, I would like to give you the opportunity to do that.
If you go to our website and actually click on the topics menu, there's the first one you'll see is the growth Ponzi scheme. And we actually call it that. And I think, it's important to understand that we have come to associate Ponzi schemes with something nefarious. Bernie Madoff knew he was cheating people. I often go back and think, did he in the early days, or was he trying to do something and then got caught up in it? That's how most Ponzi schemes end up. It's really important to understand that we, as humans, are very wired to love Ponzi schemes. Psychologists call this temporal discounting. It's why people smoke. It's why people will have bad diets today and get heart disease in the future. We are wired as humans to highly value positive feedback today and to deeply discount or ignore negative potential problems in the future. That's the way we are wired as humans. And so when we build systems that essentially exploit that, we don't question them because they're very comforting to us. They're very comforting to us. And you can see them, and we could go through a broad range of places where we see these in society today. One of them is the way we build our cities. Because we need the immediate cash to make good on all the old promises. Here's what Memphis, Tennessee would do every year. Every year they would get to the end of the year, they would have their budget, they'd have a budget gap for the upcoming year. They would then say, how much land do we need to annex to cover this budget gap? Because what happened is that the revenue from the new annexed land would show up on next year's budget, but the expenses wouldn't show up till the following year. So you got 1 year of revenue before the expenses came on the book. Of course, the next year you had those expenses, and the gap would be even bigger in your budget, so you go in and annex more land, and more land, and more land. This is the way we are wired to do things. And I think it takes a lot of discipline for us to do it otherwise. I don't control the mic, so.
So even if you have a planning team that embraces the ballet, say we're to that point, what are your recommendations, now that you are a planning commissioner, for planning leadership to get city, county managers elected to embrace the vision of that sapling 20 years from now so that we can move to that chaos bottom-up method?
I think the number one recommendation is to start small. Work humbly and start small. In our cities, we need a revolutionary radical change. You don't get revolutionary radical change by being a revolutionary radical. The way you get revolutionary radical change is by slowly shifting the culture. And so when you start, in a lot of places, and I know you've struggled here a little bit with putting bike lanes in and things, how do you get support for a city of bike lanes? You build slowly a biking and walking culture. The last thing you do is go to a street where no one's biking and walking and put in a bike lane. That just makes everybody angry. What you do is you go to the places where people are biking and walking today, and you say, okay, we already have support here for doing it. People are doing it now. How do we make that like a little bit easier for them? How do we, respond to that? How do we incrementally improve that? And what will happen is when you do that, even more people in that area will bike and walk. And you nurture that, and you nurture that in all these different places, and then you start connecting them. And so what happens is that when you show up to do the bike lane, or you show up to do the sidewalk, or you show up to do the improvement, you have a culture that's already in with this. And when the person who's against everything shows up, you have other people who will say, no, this matters, this means something to me. The second thing I would do is if you're involving the professionals at City Hall, they need to become conversant in the data. We are horrible at using data, particularly financial data, to make decisions. And if we start to do that, it illuminates so many things. Cities are not businesses, and cities should not be run like businesses, but cities must use business principles to understand how their city is running. And we just don't do that. Staff people absolutely have to start doing that. So those are the two things, I think.
I saw Ms. Avila, and then I saw Mr. Miller.
I am a city council member, and the district I live in is District 4, which is notorious for being not taken care of. And that's, why I ran. And everything that you're saying makes so much sense. But right now we are facing a vote, and it's called Banning Lewis Ranch, and it's 18,000 acres of that we are, that there's, even in the community, a fight about it being developed. And I have lived in my place for 50 years, and it's just exactly what you talked about. It was brand spanking new when we moved there. It deteriorated, and there's no investments in the city, from the city. And now we want to do that in Banning Lewis Ranch. And there's maybe just another person that can see the writing on the wall, that it'll just go through the whole cycle again. And it's, but to speak to your point is that now I've connected with other community leaders
Yes.
in my district, and we have found each other, and we're getting together, and it's exactly what you said. Even if it's just building a bench to make a hub where people can gather and talk, and we're getting that concept, but we need support. We're just starting at the ground up. And one of the things that we were told is to tell our own story, because the city as a whole and other places perpetuate a story of crime and violence and
Yes.
just neglect, and not tell the stories of the amazing resources that we do have there and the amazing people and neighbors that we have there. And maybe I'm making more of a comment, but
Yeah.
just to hear this,
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
Well, you had Jeff Speck here as part of this series last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Jeff is a wonderful guy. I'm happy to be a good friend of his. Him and I did a video cast a couple months ago. And it was funny because I was speaking, I spoke at Harvard last week, and I was chastised by one of the students for what Jeff and I said in that video. In that video, we had said, stop trying to fight the big development on the edge. Stop trying to, don't make that the hill to die on. Put that energy into actually making your place incrementally better. And the student was very upset with me. He said, how can you turn your back on this? How can you not fight this? How can you not be engaged in this? This is what you said you're against. This is bankrupting your city. It is literally making your city more fragile, poorer. All these people are going to get hurt. How can you not stand up and be against this? And I get that point. I get the angst and the anxiety of having this pending decision that you're not comfortable with, that you don't feel like this is the right direction. Let me say this. I think we all have a finite amount of energy and love and passion. Some of us have way more than others. Some of us seemingly have infinite amounts, but it's not. What we desperately need more than anything else is to create a culture for change. Those things that are not solvent are going to die a death, whether we want them to or not. I didn't really talk about Detroit. I'm not going to get too far down the path of Detroit. But when you look at Detroit, I'll give you the one-line summary of Detroit. Detroit is the first city to experiment with this auto development pattern. They're the first city to arrive at the logical destination. When you take a city and destroy its tax base and increase its liabilities by 100 times, you're going to go broke. And that's what happened to Detroit. We are all a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, in your case maybe 4 decades behind them. But that is the destination. So to me, we actually need to change our conversation and our culture around these things more than we need to throw ourselves in front of the train on the next big development. Because what we need is when things start to get hard, we need a different model that we know works, that people in this community support, and we can actually start to shift to. So if you're in a position to change the stuff that's going on, the stuff that's standard practice, I wouldn't say don't do that. But if you're trying to make change in a community, talk to your neighbor, get to know your neighbor, get to know your block, make your block better, make things better, start to build a culture about caring for our places. And when things get tough, people are going to need you and the team you've built.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. I wondered if you could clarify I've sort of taken away that big is bad and small is good.
Yeah.
And using the example of the
I wouldn't say that.
right. So
Right.
So how would you sort of harmonize
Yeah.
the large-scale development projects such as an enormous water pumping facility or
Sure.
aircraft,
Right.
airports and stuff like that, interstate highways, with the merits of small
Yep.
local interventions?
Right. So let me try to answer that succinctly. Let's take a trip back through history. If the Romans thought like modern Americans, what they would have done in the very early days of Rome is go and build the Colosseum and the Circus Maximus and the Forum, and then hope that Rome would develop around it. In Paris, they would have built the Eiffel Tower back in like the 1400s and hoped that, by the time they got to the World's Fair, there'd be a city all around it. So what we have done is we've inverted the idea of what success is. We think that building the big catalyst project is going to be the impetus for success, where the Romans, the Parisians, early Americans thought you build up incrementally and those things become the culmination of success. I think the thing we struggle with today that they didn't struggle with, they were limited because they were poor and they didn't have machinery and production methods that could transform everything overnight. We have not been limited by our capacity to dream big, and post-World War II, we were not limited by our capacity to fund things. So we could fund crazy things, have them not work out, and go, and then move on to the next crazy thing and have it not work out. And we could do that successively over and over and over and convince ourselves we were making progress. I am not going to stand up here and say that you will never have another large project that makes sense. But I would be I would be just massively, massively skeptical. Because really, I'll give you another analogy, and I do think this is a fair analogy. It's one I've used before. Imagine that you inherit a mansion, and the only requirement that you have is that you have to maintain it. It's a $20 million mansion, multiple swimming pools, how many bedrooms and theaters and bowling alleys and whatever. It's got everything, and all you have to do is maintain it, on your middle-class salary. This would be awesome for a while, wouldn't it? It'd be fantastic. You'd be living large. But at some point, it would catch up to you. We're on that verge of having it catch up to us. And if someone came to you and said, do you know what your mansion needs right now? It needs like another theater addition onto the back side with new like surround sound hologram stuff. That's what you really need, because that would be awesome given the mansion you already have. When the reality is what your mansion needs is to become like a place where 400 people live, not just you, right? Like you actually need a whole different business model. Every time that I see a big project, there's a couple exceptions to this, but almost every time I see a big project come forward today, it is a continuation of the old mindset, just with, well, now we'll do mixed use. Now we'll do this huge thing, but we use the buzzwords of the day. We'll put it on transit, we'll use mixed use, we'll do all this. It'll still be this big, huge thing built all at once to a finished state that's supposed to create catalyst investments other places. I'm not going to condemn you for doing that. I know we live in the real world, and sometimes, but to me, I would put zero energy towards those kind of things. I can't imagine an investment like that would make sense, given the current context of our cities. Your DOT is functionally broke, insolvent. They have more lane miles of roadway than they possibly have capacity to maintain. So the question becomes not how do we build another lane, how do we build another interchange? It becomes how do we maintain what we have and get more out of it? When we start asking that different set of questions, these huge projects become silly. They actually look absurd. They actually look like adding the theater addition onto your mansion when the roof is caving in. So I'm not saying that there's never something that would ever make sense. I'm not so dogmatic that I can't see some pragmatism. But I would be really, really, really skeptical of anything, particularly if it was something that was designed to induce or accommodate massive amounts of future growth.